Pull up a chair for a minute. There's a lot moving right now, but we're going to take one piece of it and make sense of it together. There's a line the government cannot cross when it comes to speech. And this week, a federal judge said using public funding to punish journalists is on the wrong side of that line. It's democracy, actually, on Ethos Track. On March 31st, a federal judge in Washington, D.C. ruled that President Trump's executive order defunding NPR and PBS was unconstitutional, a violation of the First Amendment. The order, which Trump signed in May of 2025, was titled, quote, "Ending Taxpayer Subsidization of Biased Media," unquote. It directed federal agencies to terminate all direct and indirect funding to NPR and PBS. The stated reason? That the networks provided unfair, biased coverage. The actual effect? The Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which had distributed federal funds to public media for 58 years, shut its doors in January of this year. U.S. District Court Judge Randolph Moss put it this way, quote, "The First Amendment draws a line which the government may not cross at efforts to use government power, including the power of the purse, to punish or suppress disfavored expression by others," unquote. He continued, "The executive order, quote, singles out two speakers and on the basis of their speech bars them from all federally funded programs," unquote. That, Moss ruled, is textbook viewpoint discrimination. He issued a permanent injunction barring the administration from implementing the executive order. The White House called it, quote, "a ridiculous ruling by an activist judge," unquote, and vowed to appeal. To understand why this matters, it helps to hold two truths at once. First, the practical reality. The ruling does not restore public media funding. Congress already voted in July 2025 to claw back $1.1 billion that had been appropriated for public broadcasting. The Corporation for Public Broadcasting is closed. The ruling itself acknowledges that no court order can undo what Congress chose to do. So if you're waiting for your local public radio station to get its federal funding back because of this decision, that's not what happened here. But here's why this ruling matters, and it matters a great deal. What Judge Moss established is a constitutional boundary that doesn't expire. A president cannot use the funding power of the executive branch as a weapon against journalists or media organizations because he dislikes what they report. Full stop. That principle, now permanently enjoined into the record of this case, is a wall. And walls built in federal court opinions become the precedent that future courts, future lawyers, and future administrations have to reckon with. The ruling also does something specific and important for local public media. It establishes that local stations receiving federal subsidies have the right to make their own programming decisions without government pressure, including whether to carry NPR or PBS content. That's a protection with real, ongoing teeth. It helps to step back for a second and look at how this is supposed to work. The First Amendment doesn't just protect your right to speak. It prohibits the government from using its power, including its money, to punish speech it doesn't like, or reward speech it does. That principle applies to a public broadcaster. It applies to a news organization. And it applies to any individual whose livelihood or funding could be threatened because of what they say. This ruling draws that line clearly in 2026 in this political moment. The judiciary is doing what the Constitution designed it to do. That's worth naming. The court drew a constitutional line. What happens next depends on what people do with that. Here are 3 things that you can do. Support your local public radio or PBS station directly. Member donations, not federal appropriations, are what keeps many of these stations running right now. Find yours at npr.org/stations or pbs.org/stations. Contact your members of Congress about restoring CPB, Corporation for Public Broadcasting, funding. The court ruling makes clear the executive order was unconstitutional, but restoring the appropriated funds is a legislative act. Congress can choose to do that. Let them hear from you. Read the ruling. Judge Moss's opinion is a clear, accessible explanation of First Amendment viewpoint discrimination doctrine. Primary source, plain language, constitutional grounding. It's exactly the kind of document Ethos Trek is built on. Link will be in the show notes. The court has made one thing clear. The government cannot use funding to punish speech it doesn't like. But that leaves a harder question when the courts don't answer. Who decides what gets funded in the first place? And what happens when those decisions are driven by politics instead of principle? We're going to take that up next. I'm Sarah, and this is Democracy, actually, on Ethos Trek.